Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm exploring the subject of work and the challenge currently facing employers of how to structure working practices for people in the knowledge economy. In other words, the keyboard warriors who spent much of the last 2 years working from home. Now, while some employers are insisting on everyone coming back to the office full-time, others are offering varying degrees of flexibility, and some are even getting rid of their offices entirely. I'm fascinated by this because it's not straightforward. After all, it's a process that involves humans who have views on what they're being asked or told to do. Those humans who, depending on their individual circumstances, may have either loved the freedom of not having to go to the office and want to maintain it, or really missed it and want to go back. In reality, of course, the situation's not that simple. It rarely falls into black and white scenarios along the lines I've described. But it's an issue that employers can't duck, and it comes with plenty of human risk consequences. So how can we think about meeting this challenge? That's what I'm exploring with my guest, Phil Libin. He's the former CEO of Evernote and the co-founder and CEO of All Turtles, a product studio that solves what they describe as meaningful problems. Phil's got some fascinating insights into working practices that came not just from the fact he's an experienced CEO, but also, perhaps surprisingly, out of the experiences of designing a piece of software. That software is called mmhmm. Yes, you heard that right. mmhmm. And since it was released in 2020, it's been an absolute game changer for me in my business, as it transforms virtual presentations into something magical, making them closer to a show than a slideshow. You can see some of what it can do in a demo I recorded for All Turtles. There's a link to that in the show notes. I mention this because it's important context to help you understand how Phil's thinking has evolved, and to explain why my conversation with him starts with us talking about a piece of software. And no, I'm not being paid to say nice things about mmhmm. This is not an infomercial. I just love the product. But it's what happened when All Turtles began using it regularly that really fascinates me from a human risk perspective, because it drove them to adopt an entirely new approach to thinking about how their employees could collaborate more effectively. As you'll hear, All Turtles is a globally distributed company. Part of their approach is that they don't have any offices, and their staff can pretty much work wherever they want, providing, of course, there's an internet connection available. They still have face-to-face meetings to do the things that are best done in person, but they've also evolved smart ways of using technology to bring out the best in their people. They refer to this way of working as the out-of-office world. And as Phil says, the out-of-office world isn't the same as working from home, though that can be part of it. It involves recognizing that many of the working practices and procedures we've inherited from previous generations aren't necessarily the best way of doing things in the 21st century. One of the amazing revelations that using mmhmm produced is that technology doesn't just allow us to work in different locations, it also allows us to collaborate asynchronously. In other words, at different times, on things that don't need to be done synchronously. That doesn't just mean in a follow-the-sun coverage model that exploits the existence of different time zones. It's about allowing people who may be in the same time zone to take advantage of on-demand video capabilities to work on certain parts of their job when it best suits them. That not only increases creativity and productivity, but it also ensures that time spent on live interactions, whether on video or in person, are far more impactful. What you're about to hear is some really smart thinking about how we can use technology to be more effective at work. As Phil explains, this isn't a blueprint for every company to follow. It's just what works for his organisation. But the thinking that got him and his team there is something we can all use as we try to get the best out of ourselves and others. One of the things I love about doing this show is that I get to speak to really smart people with incredible ideas. I've learned so much from Phil's insights, and I know you will as well. So please enjoy my discussion with Phil Libin on the out of office world. Phil, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here because the flagship product that you are currently involved with, it was something that I won't say it saved my business, but in 2020, as we all had to shift to a different environment, it became an absolute game changer for me because I was building my business very much around face-to-face presentations. And suddenly I'm stuck in this digital world. And although I knew how to use the tech, how was I going to make Zoom and video interactions exciting? And I found out about this phenomenal bit of kit that just suddenly allowed a whole different type of interaction. And so that's how I originally came across you. And I've been using it ever since you were in beta. And I'm a massive, massive fan. And it's enabled me to do all kinds of things. So I wanted to firstly say thank you for that. But secondly, can you talk a little bit about the thinking behind it? Because once you hear what it can do, it's genius. But it's astonishing in a way that nobody had thought of doing it before.
Well, thank you. That's really kind of you. I think actually the secret there was not so much the product, but your desire, like your thought of like, how do I make this video engaging? Like most people just didn't have that thought. Most people kind of resigned themselves to being boring when everything went to Zoom and thought, well, we'll just wait it out. And that's what we thought at first. And so we when the pandemic started, first couple of months it was just video calls and everything was kind of depressing and sad. And then, we kind of had this realization that like, well, maybe we should just lean into this. Maybe instead of thinking of video as like a poor substitute for being in person, we should say, when I watch a good Hollywood movie, when I watch Game of Thrones, I'm not like, damn it, this is a crappy experience. I'm like, oh, this is a great experience. And like, I'd rather be watching it on video than like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if there's like a Broadway, version of Game of Thrones, but I'm guessing it's not going to be as good. So like, there was nothing inherent about video that makes it boring. We just thought, well, maybe the tools aren't there and people aren't trying because I think it's a substitute for in person. But it's not a substitute for in person. It's its own thing. And when we started looking at it that way, then we came up with mmhmm, and we launched it a couple of months into the pandemic, and it's been kind of a good ride since then.
And the obvious thing that I've got to ask you, which I've heard before, but my listeners might not have done, is it's an interesting name for a product, right? So no vowels and it's instantly recognizable sound. But how did you come up with that?
Well, I mean, it started as a joke, not just the name, the whole concept. We started work on mmhmm in May of 2020, so a couple of months after lockdown, just as a way to like stay sane, as a way to keep our own meetings a little bit more interesting. And so everything about it was jokey. We were just trying to make ourselves laugh. And then we realized that it was actually a very interesting product, and a very interesting product well after the pandemic, because it's about video communication. It's not about being forced to be on video. But we kind of kept the name as a joke, as a reminder to stay a little bit humble. Plus, like it came out of the product studio that we run, which is called Old Turtles, and people were always asking me, man, Old Turtles is such a weird name. How'd you come up with Old Turtles as a name? And I was like, it's not. Wait, if you think Old Turtles is a weird name, you can do weirder. There's purpose for that.
It is super distinctive, right? So I guess the interesting thing I find myself, people go, how did you do that? And so I go, oh, it's this really cool piece of software. So I pronounce it. And then obviously you have to spell it for people. So it's from a marketing perspective, it's pretty clever, right? Because it stands out, it's unusual. And then you have to spell it. So that means people are taking note of the URL.
Yeah, I mean, Google at this point does a pretty good job of finding it, even if you spell it. But yeah, exactly. We just wanted, we wanted the name to be distinctive enough that it sort of doesn't sound like anything else, and so it forces you to make a new box in your head to put it in. You can't like shove it next to something else because it doesn't sound like anything else. Even something like that. Plus, I kind of think it's pretty elegant. I think because mmhmm is something that everyone can say without thinking, unconsciously. Everyone says it pretty much all over the world when you're agreeing with something. We're not thinking, but it's actually not supernatural to say intentionally. Like if you're trying to say it intentionally, like even I pause for like a split second because I have to kind of decide like, how am I going to, where am I going to put the intonation? How am I going to pronounce it? And it sort of makes, every time you say the name of the company, it makes like a little micro performance. And the product is about performing. The product is about being good at video. It's about like realizing that when you're on video, you are performing a little bit. And so you should think of it that way. And, just having the name of the product be like a little micro performance to get you started, I think is like, kind of sets the mood.
And I love the fact that it allows you to do things that you can't do in the physical world. And one of the immediate things that struck me was this challenge in a traditional presentation. And I've always thought that PowerPoint was a hideous thing. And you've now confirmed to me that it is, because it drives all sorts of bad behaviors in terms of sticking bullet points on a screen is never a great way to communicate with people.
Terrible.
But it's this interesting challenge of, do I look at the slides or do I look at the presenter?
Mhm.
And you've beautifully combined those two things. Well, you can have both.
Yeah. Yeah. And the presentation is never about your slides. The presentation is about you. And the slides are, the visuals. They're backup materials. They're meant to kind of focus things. And PowerPoint, Edward Tufte has this great essay from a long time ago. I mean, it's probably 20 years old by now, called The Cognitive Style of PowerPoint, where he basically argues about how PowerPoint is just this terrible thing for the world. It's a terrible thing for society because it creates this cognitive style. I think the subtitle of the essay is something like why pitching. I haven't looked at this thing in 10 years, but I still remember it. It's how influential it's been in my life. I think it's called The Cognitive Style of PowerPoint, why pitching without corrupts from within. So the idea is like the cognitive style of PowerPoint is it's a pitch. It's trying to make it easier for the person presenting to like pitch some ideas. So it gives the illusion of a coherent argument without the actual substance of a coherent argument. Like bullet points are a lazy way to not have to complete your own sentences. Um, and it's very audience unfriendly. Like no one likes being on the receiving end of a PowerPoint, like ever. It's just not, it's not a fun thing for the audience. It's point of empathy. This is extremely poor product design. The first thing you try to learn in product design is put the point of empathy where you want it to be. And for a communication tool, for a presentation tool, the point of empathy must be on the audience, right? Because there's many more people in the audience than there are presenters. So you got to make it really good for the audience. And of course, what good presenters really want is to have the audience have a great experience, to have the people that they're trying to communicate to understand what they're saying and feel communicated to and entertained. And PowerPoint is all about making it easier for the speaker to take all sorts of shortcuts. So they feel like they've accomplished something, but really the vast majority of PowerPoint presentations, they accomplish nothing. There is no place. So yeah, I think we're trying to do a lot better.
The thing I really like is the playful nature of it. So a feature you added very early on was the ability to control your presentation using a PlayStation controller.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love that for two reasons, because one, it's such fun as a presenter.
Yeah.
Because it's not a business
Right.
you're never going to sit in a business meeting with PlayStation controller in your hand.
Yeah.
But the second thing is it's a really good opener for presentation, because I always start off by saying, look, this presentation can be slightly different because I'm controlling it using the PowerPoint. There we go again, using a PlayStation controller, which I then hold up. It's a fantastic opener. And I find that from the presenter's perspective, you're kind of encouraging me to be playful.
Yeah.
And to almost get my head out of this is a formal presentation into I'm putting on a show.
Exactly. I think the vast majority of communication, for it to be effective, it needs to have, let's not say, it doesn't necessarily have to be fun, but it needs to have personality. It needs to have a human personal connection. And very often that human personal connection is some sense of playfulness, some sense of fun. Like that is what almost all of us do in person, right? Almost all of us in person. We've just learned to do this, over however many decades we've been alive, inject a little element of fun, of personality in our actual communications. Sometimes it's an outright joke. Sometimes it's kind of a smile or a wink or an intonation. If you just observe people in the world, especially like successful business people, like most things are tinged with that element of personality. And of course, sometimes you're talking about something that doesn't lend itself to humor, and you have different ways of showing personality. But then when people went on video meetings, on Zoom calls, they just assumed that none of that mattered because the tools didn't let them do it. And they just got rid of all of it, and everything became bland. Everything became like watching a deposition on videos. And that doesn't just make it boring. It makes it ineffective. It makes it an ineffective way to communicate. Not because there's anything wrong with Zoom, the product. There isn't. I mean, I'm very happy that Zoom was around. The pandemic would have been much worse for the world if Zoom hadn't been there. It's that people kind of checked out when they were using it because they were thinking of it as a poor substitute for being in person. And so people who might be quite engaging in in-person meetings turn into zombies on Zoom. And we just said, all right, let's change that mindset. Like, look at all of this video. Look at Saturday Night Live. Look at The Daily Show. Look at Game of Thrones. Look at all of this stuff. There's all sorts of people, actors and newscasters and sports people and comedians who know how to be super engaging in video. Why don't you? And it turns out it's actually really simple if you have the right tools. And now video communication can be much more effective than even in-person communication for certain things.
Right. And the other bit I love is I think encourages huge amounts of creativity. So one of the things I always hate, particularly if I'm presenting like a conference,
Mhm.
was can you send us the slides beforehand? I've kind of always resisted that because I'm like,
I always say no.
and I just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And it's for their convenience, not mine. But the bit I love now is I go, no, I'm not going to be using slides. And the amazing thing I found is the ability to, I mean, I'm literally editing, 30 seconds, yeah, probably 30 seconds, probably exaggeration, but like 5 minutes before, I can make changes to my presentation in a way that if I'd had to commit to it before, it would be a much lesser thing. And so I wanted to say thank you for giving me the perfect thing, because I can just legitimately go, I will not be using slides, which scares the
Yeah.
hell out of conference organizers, but actually it's true. And it makes I'm much better because it's kind of literally it's almost like putting a news broadcast together where I'm scrabbling around for the running order kind of finesses itself in the seconds before I go live in some cases. And I love
Yeah.
that ability to be that creative.
And it's very much, this is similar to the world that I'm in is startups, right? So if you're pitching, you're trying to raise money, you've got a meeting with VCs and they ask for your slides ahead of time. You should never send slides ahead of time because like your pitch is not your slides. Like your slides are the backup material. The presentation is you plus the slides. What is this? Send it ahead of time. Like that just ruins it for everyone. So what I do now, the way we raised a lot of money for, but actually for all the companies that I've been helping and evolving with since it came out, you don't have slides. You don't have pitch decks anymore. You make a presentation in, you record it and you send the video ahead of time. And that's actually perfect. That achieves what everyone wants. It achieves what the investors want, which is ahead of time, they get to see what this is all about. They can watch it at faster than 1x speed. They usually watch it at like 1.5x. It's the person, it's the material. So you make like a very entertaining 5 or 10 minute video. And then by the time you're talking to them live, either in person or on video, everyone's already seen the material. You don't have to do the presentation in real time. You're just talking. You're just doing the question and answer. It's just the interactive stuff. And so, yeah, when they ask if an investor asks to see the slides ahead of time, I understand why, and I'll send it. But I'll do much better than slides. I'll send the video that has the slides and me talking in a way that they have access to both all the time. And then when we actually talk synchronously, it's a far more productive thing.
And that brings us really nicely to the bit that really blew my mind. So I thought the software was great. And then you shifted into a sort of, let's think about, and this was sort of implicit in your thinking, but you kind of went public with this thing that said, actually, we need to start thinking about two different dynamics, which is physical presence and being live. Can you just talk us through that? Because I think it's amazing. And when you start thinking these terms, it opens all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah, I think this was really the big realization for me and for us. We've been running the company fully distributed since the beginning. We've never had an office, but and Old Turtles went fully distributed when the pandemic started. We've got hundreds of people all over the world, and we've been trying to figure out how do you do that productively just for our own companies. And the thing that I realized is it's actually not about the most important question is actually not about like in the office or remote. The most important question is actually synchronous or asynchronous. It's how much work can we shift from the tyranny of assuming that everything has to be done synchronously, everything has to be done at the same time as other people are doing it, to asynchronous. So, and made us think about exactly like what's best to do live and in person physically. What's best to do live but on video, like you and I are talking right now live but on video, and what's best to do pre-recorded but on video. And it actually turns out that there's things that are much better in each of those categories. It's not that like live and in person is better for everything. It isn't. It is definitively not. There are things that are better in each of those sections. So we call it the communication hierarchy, this pyramid, where there's 3 parts in the pyramid. All the way to the top is live and in person, and that's the most expensive and the hardest to replicate and the hardest to scale when you're actually like physically in the same environment as someone. And when you're doing that, like it's got to count. It's got to be special. You should be bonding. You should be building a relationship. You should be having good food. You should never, ever, ever be sitting in a room with other people for 2 hours bored. That's a tragedy for all of you. Like you'll never get that time back. Plus like all of the energy and stress you have to burn to get there. So the in-person stuff is vital, but only for actual like human bonding and connection. And then the live video stuff is really good for back and forth discussion. especially back and forth discussion when you're actually looking at and pointing at things. When you're saying like, oh, what about this design? What about this screen? What about this spreadsheet? How about this point in the graph? And so we made it easy on video with them to like point at things. It's as basic as that. And then recorded video, asynchronous, is best for any time I'm trying to explain something. Like any explanation of moderate complexity or more is actually better recorded, better for the audience and better for you, better for the presenter. Because if I need to explain something, like I was teaching a class last semester at the business school here, at the Walton School in Arkansas, and I didn't do any lecturing live. Why would anyone want to sit in a room and like watch me speak too slowly at the same speed as everyone else is watching me and at the same time as everyone else? It makes no sense. So all of the lectures we, pre-record, we post, people can watch it. The lectures are all high quality because I can use slides, I can do all of my, jazz hands. All the students watch it when they can most pay attention, not at the exact same time, not at the worst, not at the lowest common denominator time. They can watch it at faster speeds. They can rewind. They don't have to like take notes while I'm speaking. Why would you ever need to take notes while someone is speaking? That's so stupid, because you might miss something. Well, you already missed something by taking notes. Of course it should be recorded. And then we would get together live on video once a week, but only after everyone's already seen everything, just to talk. So all those discussions were great. And then we would get together in person. Like I think 3 times during the semester we got together in person, but only to have dinner, only to like actually bond. And so like that idea of pulling apart in person versus distributed, live versus recorded, synchronous versus asynchronous, like that kind of opened up. That was like the magic key that opened up this like new world of productivity.
As soon as you explained it, I just kind of went, oh man, if I think about a traditional meeting, you're spot on. The amount of time that is, we sit around a table while someone does a presentation, which some people will not be interested in, others will be massively passionate about. We go through this pointless ritual of a lecture, and then we have a brief discussion. And it was the moment I just went, I've wasted so much of my life in these processes
Yeah.
that I think have achieved very little. And I love this idea of thinking about, well, how do we get the best out of people? This is the flip
Yep.
side of my human risk thing is, well, let's look at structures that don't bore people, that inspire them, that allow you to dip into detail the things you want to see, right? Stuff that you're really passionate, interested about, you can spend more time. Stuff you don't really care about, you can pull back from, and giving people choice.
Exactly. Yeah. And now that I've thought about like this, and I've had, a year or two of running things this way, I can never go back. Because it's just so obviously backwards and inefficient now. I was in this class a few weeks ago. I took a class at Stanford, which was great. And a lot of the content was really good. But several times, it was at the sort of traditional classroom setting where, I find myself sitting in a lecture hall with a bunch of other people, listening to someone talking and kind of thinking like, what is going on here? Like, why is this happening? Like, oh, I'm physically uncomfortable because I don't actually like sitting for very long. I'm just not used to sitting that much. I usually walk around, I have a standing desk, but like I can't get up and start pacing because that would be weird because there's like 50 other people in this room. What the hell? Why am I listening to this person? I can't get up and walk around. And then somebody asked a question. Someone interrupted to ask a question. And it was a question that I did not care about. And I'm like, God damn it. Now, not only am I listening to this thing too slowly, now I have to wait for somebody to ask a question that I don't care about. And then I have to wait for an answer. Like this is an extremely inefficient way of conveying information. But then after kind of the lecture, then we did some hands-on exercises, and then everything changed. And then I was like, well, of course I should be here in person. Now this makes a lot more sense. I can talk to people, do stuff. It's much more hands-on. It's much more interactive. And so I'm not saying get rid of the in-person stuff. I'm just saying always do video recorded and live and in person, and do whatever is best for each thing. And so when you're doing in person, only do the things that are great in person. And when you're doing video, only do the things that are great on video, and everyone wins and everything's better. Now, obviously, sometimes it is a substitute. Sometimes, you wind up with COVID and you can't show up. So that's just like a way to be more resilient. But those are the exceptions. Like forget about the exceptions. The mainstream use cases should be do what's best in every category.
I love the way you articulate it because it's once you start to look, it's one of those things that sort of is obvious once you've spotted it.
Yeah.
And I think what I find fascinating is that we've built constructs over time, be it the way we run meetings, be it the fact that we have to go to a physical office to do stuff, presenteeism logic that makes no sense whatsoever. And it's taken, I mean, the pandemic has produced awful outcomes, but I think it's one of those things that's been a shift. And I think this is a really good example of a very, very positive learning that I suspect would have come over time. But my
Yeah.
sense is that your thinking was jolted by that, and this is a sort of COVID output, if you like.
Yeah. I think there's several big silver linings to come out of COVID, or that will come out of COVID. I think the whole, out of office world, this kind of thinking, there's many others, obviously. I think the mRNA vaccines as a technology are vastly important and applicable to all sorts of things. There's going to be lots of important stuff that comes out of it. Of course, it's a massive tragedy scale, but I think, humanity reacted to it sometimes very badly, but, there are a few bright spots. So it was nice to think about it that way.
And I've heard you talk before around the thinking that when we talk about what is work going forward, one of the things that got embedded early on was this, as we think about distributed working, remote working, there's this
Mhm.
kind of like either you're at home or you're in the office. Can you talk a little bit around your perspective on that? Because I think it's really interesting the way you cut through that. The fact that we were all forced to work from home created, in some respects, an unhelpful norm.
Exactly. Yeah. I think many of us took the wrong lesson from the early months of COVID, from when we were forced to work from home with, very little warning and very little preparation, and working from places that were not designed to work from. So they were usually too small and had, screaming children and all sorts of stuff. And we all got traumatized by that, or many people got traumatized by that. And we took the wrong lessons from it. Working in a distributed fashion does not mean working from home. It just means being intentional, being thoughtful about where do I want to work from right now, and choosing the optimal place. And if what I want to do right now is be with my team because we're doing some important in-person experiential things, then let's get together as a team. Probably not at the office, because the office sucked for all of that stuff anyway. The office is like the lowest common denominator. Like I had a team of designers over to visit me in Bentonville. We did a product sprint for the next design of mmhmm, and we did it from the Crystal Bridges Museum. It's one of the greatest museums in the world here. It's amazing. We like rented phenomenally beautiful room with an amazing view, with surrounded by art in this museum. And we did a couple of days of design and brainstorming while like sitting in this room, walking around, walking through nature, looking through art. We were in person, weren't in an office. So we're like, yeah, for that kind of thing, I want to be in person, but not in this like relatively crappy place. Let's do it. No. Sometimes, I want to do other types of work, and then I choose where I want to be. Sometimes I'm in my studio at home. Sometimes I work from a coffee shop. Sometimes I go to a small office that I've got that's a 5-minute walk because it's a nice day. I feel like walking the dog. The idea is, if you break this assumption that all work has to happen in a central place, you're actually letting people choose where they want to work so they could be more productive. And people can make different choices, and sometimes different choices throughout the day. Like I usually work from more than one place during the day. Like right now I'm in my home office because we're recording, so I have like a decent setup. But as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna work from a different location, just because I want to do a few hours of like quiet like writing. And there's like this beautiful place like near a museum that I could just sit and write. I never had that choice in the office. So, like I had to like waste a bunch of time commuting, and then I was stuck there for the whole day, and then I had to waste a bunch of time commuting back. Oh, and by the way, 0% of the people in our companies spend any time commuting, which is also kind of amazing. How would I ever Why would I ever ask an engineer or a designer or a lawyer or anyone who works on a laptop to waste 3 hours every day sitting in traffic? That just seems inhumane. Would never do.
And again, it all sounds incredibly simple, and I love this idea of, particularly if you're working in a creative space. And in fact, I would argue anybody in the knowledge economy, which I know you have a different phrase for, which is people working with laptops, which I love as a.
That's not my phrase. I think I stole that from, I think I first heard Brian Chesky at Airbnb say that. We used to say knowledge workers. And then I think I heard someone, I think it was Brian, say people who work on laptops. So I'm like, yeah, that's a more human phrase. I don't know.
But I love that. So if by default it's a cognitive output, right, which logically, if you're sitting in front of a keyboard, is likely to be, then we do need that sort of stimulation. And I'm completely with you on museums, for example. They're
Yeah.
fantastic spaces. They force a different form of thinking than you'll get in a different environment. And I love this idea of, actually, if you start to say, well, it's not weird that you go hang out in a museum, it's what we do.
Yeah.
And I'll find the space that works for me. And that might be sitting in the park one day. That might be, maybe I need a really noisy environment for certain dynamics. And I love that. And I think that's a really smart way of thinking how do we get the best out of people, which is giving them the freedom to work out what works for them.
Right. And all of these spaces are like, there's so many beautiful spaces that tend not to have a lot of people in them during the middle of the day, because for whatever reason, a lot of people like seem to be stuck in boring like conference rooms. time. So yeah, of course you should do that. And of course the world should be remade to take advantage of this so that in the future, the most expensive real estate shouldn't be like random lowest common denominator places that people have to commute to work for a few hours a day. They should be integrated into the community so that no one should be wasting time sitting in traffic, and they should be beautiful and conductive to the kinds of life and the kinds of work that people want to do. And it'll be different for different people and different for different industries and different for different towns, but we unlock that potential. Like I say, we started referring to this as the out of office world, because the acronym is OO. We like sounds, so it's OO, OOO, out of office. And I think like the ooh world is like when I say out of office, I kind of want people to hear it as if I'm saying out of jail. It's like, yeah, you used to have this thing that dominated the vast majority of your life and that constrained very sharply what you could do and what you couldn't do. And now you're free from it. And now you can be more intentional. And by you, I mean people, but I also mean companies. You can be much more intentional about where should people be and when should they be working. And yeah, if you're building rockets or electric cars and you need people in person, by all means, have people in person. By the way, put your company in a place where people don't have to commute for 2 hours. Do that, which you have a lot more opportunity to do in this world. Um, and those people that need to be somewhere in person aren't competing with everyone else who's also tying up, causing traffic and driving up rental prices because they don't have to be there. They're just forced arbitrarily. So everyone benefits. People who have geographic requirements for their job benefit tremendously. And the people who don't have geographic requirements for their jobs benefit tremendously as well. And the companies do better. So it's just a very obvious thing to me. And of course, there's lots of problems and lots of challenges, of course. And we have to figure them out. And we figured some of them out and some we're still working on. But I just find a lot of people focus on the challenges. And if you focus on the challenges, like it doesn't work for me. I'd much rather focus on the amazing superpowers, and that makes it clear why the challenges are worth fighting for.
And it's interesting because it sort of presupposes there weren't challenges with the old way.
Exactly.
We can't change anything because it's almost like we had the perfect model and now you're trying to destroy it. And I think we all instinctively know that it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about like, especially from like, executives in big companies, like, well, how do we preserve our corporate culture? And I'm like, fuck your corporate culture. It's like, your corporate culture was not that good to begin with. You just have like a rosy memory of what it was like. And also it was like pretty good for you. It was pretty good for me, the CEO. Doesn't mean that it was working great for everyone else. Like, why do you want to preserve your culture? You should improve your culture. You should think about what kind of, not how do we go back to the way it used to be? How do we go forward to the way it should be? How do we go forward to the way that we want it to be? Be more intentional about it. And yes, it's going to be different, but here's your opportunity to make it different and better.
One of the things I thought was really interesting was the explosion in use of surveillance software. Because what you've talked about there relies on trust.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a sort of, I trust my employees and implicitly to get the job done in a way that works best for them. So that'll be the location that suits them. That'll be, if they want to work in the middle of the night. So you're operating very much on a basis of we are employing adults and we'll treat them that way.
Yeah.
But can see some managers who are unable to adjust. But there seems to be this explosion of surveillance software and sort of like, well, we need to get back to the office so that we can check what they're up to. So a complete lack of trust in employees. And I can concoct a logic using my sort of human risk brain that says, well, people could do all kinds of things. I mean, I think my answer to that is, well, that's a different kind of problem, right? That is the sort of people you're hiring, the relationship you're having, the incentives you're putting in front of them. And you're trying to compensate for that as opposed to thinking back to basics. Well, how do we build a world where we can think slightly differently about it?
And how do we build a world where we can recover from bad actions? Not assume that everyone's a criminal or that the vast majority of people are criminals or dishonest, but sometimes some people are. And how do we make sure that we can recover from that? It's not about spying on people. It's about like building a resilient society, company. And it does make it, look, I think the whole model of trust, I've had to change my thinking about trust a lot. I very much grew up in this culture where you have to earn my trust. It's like, yeah, you got to earn my trust. Like, we got to work together. I got to see what you're doing. And like over time, you earn my trust. And now I've realized, man, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for you to earn my trust. I'm just going to trust you from day one. You know what? If I'm working with you, I trust you. I fully trust you. I trust you from day one. You don't have to earn anything. I trust you completely. You can break that trust. And if you break that trust, the good news is there's 8 billion people in the world, right? Didn't we just cross over 8 billion? There's 8 billion people in the world. I only need a couple of hundred of them So, if you break my trust, I really don't need to ever deal with you again because, all of our jobs are global. We can hire from everywhere. Like it's easy, but, I trust you by default. So it's about trusting by default. It's about assuming that people are adults. It's about selecting, of course, the right kinds of people and then making sure that, that you've got the right kind of management techniques. But, you just assume that, yeah, some people are gonna screw up and it's okay. The cost of recovering from that is so much less than the cost of not trusting people to begin with.
Right. And I think that's a really interesting point, which is this sort of like, well, we look at the worst case scenario and we try and prevent that worst case
Yeah.
scenario, which is sort of like there's an inevitability it's going to happen. So I'm going to put loads of defenses in place to prevent it, as opposed to perhaps looking at the root causes of why it might happen in the first place. And I always think, financial services is a really interesting example, right? Loads of bad behavior that we've seen. But you say, well, why does that
Yeah.
happen? And the answer isn't you've hired a bunch of people that are setting out, that, as you say, there will be that small percentage that are the kind of what we might call the criminal element. But there's a ton of other people who are just responding to the incentives you put in front of them. And so if you
Yeah.
incentivize people, you've got to open, think of Wells Fargo, you've got to open tons of accounts. Right, guess what? If that's the number, they're going to do that. And so I think this is a really interesting thing, which says, okay, let's not worry too much about the big prevention piece because we've built something that makes it less likely it's going to happen in the first place. And we'll just keep an eye on it, and we'll never put somebody in a position where they can go completely mad and take the company down.
Exactly. Yeah, hopefully. And we'll have plans for how do we fix and how do we recover problems. And so that's something like when I was in high school, um I really wanted to go to West Point for college, or actually any of the military academies, West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy. Not because, and I knew I could never get in because like I couldn't even do a single pull up. I don't think. No way was that happening. And I wasn't even that into the military. The thing that I really loved in high school, I was obsessed with this, is I read about the honor system, the honor code, right? And then I love the fact that these things, I think they still do. At least they used to have honor codes, which is the idea is like the honor code system is like, well, we're not going to check on you. We're just going to assume that you're doing the right thing. And the penalty for not for cheating is like you're out, you're expelled. Like the penalty for honor code systems is if you violate it, like they don't check, they don't bother to take the resources to constantly police you. Therefore, you can go much further and much faster because you don't have that constant friction, constantly checking at people. You have the norm of honest and honorable behavior. The community checks itself. And if you're found to be violating it, and of course people violate it, of course they do. They're just expelled. But it happens relatively frequently. So it's like you assume that some people are going to violate it and those people are going to be expelled and you have that mechanism. And then you don't put this like tax and friction on everybody else all the time by checking them. I think some version of that works really well. Again, for companies where it's mostly people who work on laptops, mostly distributed, you just say, well, yeah, we just trust you. So for example, like we got rid of, we don't have receipts or expense reports for the most part because, why? Like, why is it the human's job to carry information from one computer into a different computer via a sheet of paper? Why do I need that? Why do I need to pay people to like check your receipt? They trust you. And so how do you do that? Well, we have to find structures. Like, for example, we don't like people can't reimburse stuff anymore. We used to have all sorts of stuff that you submit for reimbursals for. And like, I hate that. I hate reimbursing because like it's more work for the person because you have to like save your receipts and then I have to pay someone to like keep track of them and process it. So we just said, look, we used to pay all this money per person for office space. We had a facilities budget, and then we're just going to do a distributed facilities budget. So we basically we give everyone's currently about $800 a month, which is what we used to spend per person on rent and coffee, internet. We just give it to people as their paycheck so they could use it, for things that make themselves, productive, more productive at work. And you can use it for whatever you want. We're not going to check. We just assume that like, yeah, if you're an employee, you want to be productive. And, we share tips and best practices about what you could spend it on, what stuff is, what stuff can be done pre-tax or post-tax or, whatever. We have some allocation that had to work with accountants and lawyers to figure that out. But the point is, there's no humans shuffling paperwork and there's no verification. You just do it. You make an attestation. And this is how it works. Would that work in every kind of company and every kind of industry? Of course not. But I'm not running every kind of company and every kind of industry. I'm only running this company, and it works great for us.
But I think you make a really good point about the cost of not trusting
Yeah.
people
Constant,
is immense when you think about
constant.
it.
I mean, at a meta level, this is sort of like literally the problem with a lot of like, crypto and Web3 stuff, right? Just at a philosophical point. Like the whole point of like, not to get off vastly off topic, right? But like the whole point of like, blockchain stuff is to have a trustless system, is to have a system where you can operate without trust, which is an interesting thing. But whenever you're operating without trust, you waste so much more energy in a trustless world. And like literally for the purposes of crypto, it's like literal energy. Like you're literally, in order to get Bitcoin to work in a way that doesn't trust anyone, you are literally like burning down, the planet because you need the electricity to power it. And of course there's like other systems, whatever. But that observation that like trust, when you have trust, it so reduces the amount of energy that you have to spend. And therefore you can use that energy, whether it's mental energy or, energy or oil energy. You can use that energy to actually develop and grow and be productive because you're not constantly using it in a trustless world to stay safe. It's kind of an interesting observation. And of course there's edge cases, but again, like I don't have to deal with all of them. I only have to deal with the company that I'm running. We can design that company to work really well in this spot.
But I just think it's a fascinating philosophy because it's leaning on something that intuitively feels right. Right. You're not, it feels counterintuitive if I deploy traditional business logic. But actually, if I think about human logic and the sort of things that we use to operate, I don't know, in our family environment, then actually what you're saying makes perfect sense. It's for some reason, business has kind of got disconnected from that. And so I agree that there are contexts in which you don't just want to leave people loose to do what I don't want people running a nuclear power plant and kind of being let loose and be as creative as you want.
Sure.
And maybe we do need to put certain controls around important things,
Course.
but intuitively, it's a much more human approach.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is incentives, as you said, but a lot of it is also just lazy management. Um, we kind of have an epidemic of bad management in companies. And like in Silicon Valley, tech is just rife because like it's an industry that doesn't take management seriously. Like, we take like engineering seriously, but management is what you do when you're no longer productive as an engineer or something. The idea. And of course, management's a real thing and good management is very much a real thing. I've started like understanding that a little bit more after moving to, I moved from San Francisco about a year and a half ago to Bentonville, Arkansas. And so just like I have no connection with Walmart. It's Walmart. It's like everyone around here is Walmart. So I hear a lot more about how like old world companies who actually try to have really good management work. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's actually interesting. Like management is a thing. And I think as managers, a lot of us, myself included, were very lazy in the past and we relied on all sorts of crutches and shortcuts to avoid like doing hard work. For example, it's my job to sort of evaluate like how productive are you being if you work for me? Like I gotta like figure out how productive are you, right? How did I used to do that before? Of course, we had like performance reviews and whatever, but all that was like bureaucratic. A lot of it was like, do you look productive? Honestly, like, I see you in the office every day. Are you there when I come in? Are you still there when I leave? Look like you're being productive? Look like you have a good attitude? Like a lot of it was that. And and then, we all went distributed and I had no idea if you were still working when I showed up. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what you look like. Exactly. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, wow, how do I know if you're being productive? But of course, like those old shortcuts were a terrible way to begin with. It's not like those ever worked very well. And they rewarded people who were good at looking busy, as you said. And they rewarded people who were good at like, like managing up, sucking up to higher management. Those aren't the people you want to, necessarily reward. So we as managers do need to do our job now in this distributed world because we need to say, well, we have to measure impact. We have to measure effectiveness. We have to measure it. We have to say, here's the goals and here's how you did. Like, because you can't just rely on the old shortcuts. So I can understand why some executives are resistant to it because A, they had it pretty good in the old world, I mean, at least better than most people. And B, like we've had a few decades of figuring out how to half-ass management. And like, we just don't know how to half-ass management in a distributed way yet. We have to kind of take it seriously. At some point, we'll figure out a way to be lazy again. But for now, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and I love that because it also occurred to me that if you're in a senior position in a traditional company, you've got there by playing that game. And so the idea of changing the thing that allowed you to get to your position of power, right, seems crazy. Why would I do that? Because I'll be exposed all of a sudden, right? I've managed to succeed at this game. I want to keep that game going for as long as possible.
Oh, I mean, look, when I was at Evernote, right? So we spent a ton of money making this beautiful office. right off of 101 in Redwood City. And, I helped design it, and it was great. All sorts of open floor plan and collaborative areas. And it was just it was beautiful, very expensive office. And then we spent a lot of money on very fancy buses to bus people from, wherever they live, San Francisco and other various places, to the office, and to pay for electric cars and all sorts of commuter benefits. Average of 90 minutes each way commute. And then we spent a lot of money. This was the innovative part. We spent a lot of money buying people. We bought everyone very expensive headphones so that they could wear them in the office, so they could block out the noise from all the other people that we just bust into this place. I don't know what, and somehow we were like, yeah, but this is innovative management. We have a great office. We have a great commuting benefit, and we give people headphones. And, the average commute was 3 hours, right? 1 hour and a half each way. And I kind of liked it because, my commute was only 5 minutes because, I put the office close to where I was living. I can afford to live nearby. And when I showed up, like, people were pretty nice to me, like the CEO. And so I was like, this is great, but it's not great for anyone. It was great for me. It was great for senior management. On average, people were commuting for 3 hours. I can't even imagine how inhumane that is. If you don't like, why would you ever give 3 hours every single day in like the middle of your life? All of the things that it destroys your ability to, bond with your children, have friends, all of that stuff. And even the concepts, the industrial age concepts of like the weekend. Like the weekend is a weird concept, right? The weekend as a concept is only there because work sucks so much and is so disruptive to your normal life. Vacation is kind of an odd concept. Retirement is kind of an odd concept. The concept that when you're younger and earlier in your career, you have to suffer, you have to make all of these compromises so that in a few decades, maybe you can retire and have the lifestyle you want, is a weird concept. If you've always wanted to like live on the beach and surf, why do you have to wait until you're 50 to do it, to retire? Why don't you go live on the beach now while doing your job? You can still work with me. You can have a full-time job, just go surf. I mean, as long as you can still get your work done, which, you have an internet and a laptop, go do it now. Enjoy your life while you're living it. Not only because that's more humane because you get to enjoy life, but also because it'll make you better at your job. Because if you're a creative person, I want people who are generally well-balanced and happy. Obviously, things happen to everyone. They're just also more productive and more creative. So it's a win-win situation.
And it occurs to me there's no other investment, particularly one of this size, that you would make in a resource or an asset, if you like, where you behave in that way, right? You wouldn't go and overload a computer system or a bridge or something. You'd sit there going, okay, we have to treat this thing in the right way, maintain it, make sure we're getting the best out of it. And yet, for some reason, with human capital, as you rightly point out, it's this sort of exploitative model of, well, we got you and we can work you really hard. And hence you get the word compensation that refers to pay, right? It is compensating you for the hell that you're going through. And I find that absolutely bizarre. And the effort that people go into to hire people, the interview process, I always struggle. I mean, my background is in banking, hilarious thing where they ask you, what do you enjoy doing in your spare time, right? That's a key. How interesting are you? And then they put you through a work environment that prevents you from doing that. Right. So the thing that you've allegedly hired people for, you have no interest in perpetuating.
And one of my first startups, this is my fifth. So I think like my first or second startup, I remember I was walking through the office one day and one of my co-founders was like, hey, Phil, check this out. Check out this thing I've been working on in my spare time. And I'm like, you know how I feel about you having spare time. And, I was joking, but like, when I think about it, like, I actually don't have spare time. I don't have spare time right now. I don't have spare time. I have time. I have time to spend doing meaningful things. And a lot of that is work related because I'm working on meaningful things. And I hope that everyone that's working with me feels that they're working on meaningful things. But there's other things other than work that are meaningful. There's friends and there's family and there's art, there's children, and there's all sorts of stuff. And it's just time. And I want to have the time to do those things. And having an extra 3 hours a day, every single day, just from commuting, was a very good start. And then not wasting all of the sitting in boring meetings for 2 hours without accomplishing it. Like all of that is like, exactly as you said, the notion of spare time is a little bit insulting. It's a little bit inhumane.
It occurs to me that, I mean, if we look at sort of the Google models, for example, where they'll provide everything for you, free food, you have no reason to ever leave the office. which I think is interesting because Goldman Sachs operates on a similar basis, right? There's a dentist and a whatever you want in the building, so you never have to leave. I think that's in part designed to stop people going to do job interviews because you remove any possible excuse they might have had for for leaving the building.
Yep.
But Google, it sounds quite good, right? Isn't it? We're providing all these benefits, but actually, it's all about keeping people in the office.
Yeah, I mean, so my brother worked at Google in the golden days of that. So I ate a lot of free lunches, like for a while. Like when I was at Evernote, he was at Google. Like I was hanging out with him. I ate a lot of free Google food. It was very good. And yeah, it was kind of a utopia, but like I think most utopias, when you actually like look at what it does, it's actually extremely dystopian. It means that, yeah, the company's trying to provide for 100% of all of your professional, financial, emotional, psychological, spiritual, like political needs. You get it all from the company. Like that sucks. Like everything you work is there. Like a lot of people are kind of sleeping there or nearby. Your friends are there. The people you date are there because I'm also even gonna have like time to do it. You eat your meals there. It's terrible. Like I would rather have a job that like lets me hang out with adults that I don't work with because it's not all consuming. And yeah, you're totally right. A lot of the model is like, so, you don't go, your employees can't do job interviews, but even that's worth challenging. Look, I want my employees to, we say this explicitly to managers. Your success as a manager is that someone working for you, that their next job is more epic than their current job. And that their current job with you is what let them do their next job, is what let them get their next job and have it be more impact, more awesome, more epic. That is success. Hopefully, some of the time that next job is still with us. And that's great. If your next job, that your next assignment, your next tour of duty is like better and more epic than your current one, and it's still with my company, fantastic. If your next job or assignment or tour of duty is more epic, but it's with a different company, fantastic. The only failure is if you leave for something worse, because then you're leaving because I'm a bad manager, or maybe other reasons, but probably because I'm a bad manager. So even that, even like the mentality that somehow it's a bad thing for your employees to further their career is a weird mentality. And if they have to like sneak around and keep it secret and go to interviews, that also leads to very bad effects because then people wind up leaving, in the middle of a project and it's very hard to coordinate. Like we're all just much better off, like not treating people as resources, just treating them as people and saying, hey, we're in this together. We're building this thing. I want to make sure that the next thing you're working on is even better than this thing. It would be nice if it was still with me, but if not, I'm going to help you get the next thing. Right? Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Let's make it happen and treat employees as alumni instead of as, ex employees.
And I love that because I've always thought whenever you have a sort of a traditional career development discussion, the kind of thing companies do to tick the box, let's have a discussion about your career. There's a massive conflict of interest,
Right?
because if your employer is only talking about options within there, then that may not be the best thing for you.
Yeah, exactly. And Reid Hoffman wrote a really good book about this years ago called The Alliance, where he basically talks about how this is a fundamental dishonesty between how companies and employees, how employers and employees, mutual dishonesty, how they talk about their job. It's all couched in language as if this is like permanent and you can be here for 20 years and it's a family, but it's not. The actual language in the contracts in all caps is like employment at will. And the average tenure is like tiny, right? Like the average tenure, it's like Google, at least at that point, it was like a year and a half or something. So people are leaving all the time, but it's disruptive and everyone pretends that that's not what it is, which is super inefficient. You're much better off just saying, I think Reid Hoffman uses the term tour of duty in that book, which is an interesting term. But the idea is like, look, we're going to do this thing and it's a time bound thing. And here's what we're trying to accomplish. And here's why doing this thing will make you better so that your next tour of duty could be even higher impact. So you'll get promoted at the next tour of duty. Whether you get promoted in our company or in a different company is almost a secondary question. The point is, the employee commits to doing the best they can in this tour of duty, in this like specific work. The company commits to being honest about that and giving the employee the kind of resources to develop and be really good at it, and then helping them get their next tour of duty, which is even better. And again, depending on what the company is, the next tour of duty may very well be inside the company or maybe outside, but both of those are okay. What's not okay is treating that person like a resource that you're trying to like squeeze as much value from. And I never thought about it until you just said it, but yeah, the word compensation is kind of a dystopian word, right? You
Right.
shouldn't be compensated for something sucky. We should be creating value together. You should be sharing in the value that we're making together, not like we are giving you something bad and to make it okay, giving you some compensation. That's weird. It's like, yeah. Why is the money that I make from my job called the same thing as the money that I make if I, get hit in a car accident? That's weird.
It's right, and I think there's when you start to look at the language, it points to exactly the structure that you've got there.
Right.
And I think that for me, that's the biggest clue, right? The moment you start to go, why do we call it that? Well, there's a reason. Let's have a look at the basis for this. And you start, and I love that you're just challenging the simple basis and going, well, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
Because it makes no sense.
Yeah. And I do not want to stop my employees from leaving my company to take a better job. I don't. I want to help them do it. I would rather do that in a controlled way where they're not leaving in the middle of a project. But that's not indefinite. That's like, a few months here or there. And I very much like the opportunity to make that better job part of my company if there is such a better job. But yeah, I would never want I would never think, oh, my goal is to keep people here. It's not. My goal is to do the best for these people. And a lot of them are going to wind up staying because that's what's best.
And there's something really interesting I heard you say that I just want to pick you up on is you talked about I think it was in your own podcast session. I'll put links to all those in the show notes, where you talked about your diary and the information that you share with people. And I thought that was really fascinating that you were thinking more thematically than what you were spending your time doing. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I'm changing it a lot. So I used to have my calendar used to be open to for employees to just see what I'm doing, and I closed that off. You just run into too much trouble that way because for two reasons. Like at Evernote, I did this and it wound up running into a problem because like a lot of people just wind up looking at my calendar because it's interesting to them. Who's it see?
Well, what's he up to?
Yeah.
Right.
But then they get, but it's very incomplete information. And so like, like I had a meeting. I remember at Evernote at some point, I had a meeting with Steve Ballmer, who was, president of Microsoft at that point. And then like the whole rumor was like, oh, we're being bought by Microsoft. I'm like, no, I had a meeting. I ran into Steve Ballmer and I'm like, can I ask you some advice on like CEO stuff? And he said, sure. But there was like my calendar, Steve Ballmer. So like the incomplete information was causing way too many problems. And then also like, it's kind of a big security, like just for the company, for me, like the CEO is always a major vector of attack for the company. So if you make it so that there's hundreds of people that have access to your calendar, it makes it much easier for like, if any of those accounts get hacked, then hackers can like see where you are and then they can like write phishing emails, they can write a fake email and say, hey, I'm at the meeting with Steve Ballmer. Can you wire me $10,000? Right. So that doesn't really work. So I've kind of shut all that down. But what I started to do now, and I've got to find the right format to doing it. I used to put it in my calendar, but now I actually think I'm going to do it. I'm going to make videos that I post to the company every week that basically just says like, here's what I'm thinking about, because I want people to know what I'm working on, what I'm thinking about, so that if they want to help me think about it, if they've got something to say about it, they know that it's a good time to do it. And a good time doesn't mean, 9 p.m. on a Thursday because we're not synchronous anymore. A good time means like, yeah, this week I'm thinking about these topics. And so anytime you want to talk, not necessarily synchronously, like we can talk synchronously, but you can text me, you can send me a video, like this is what's on my mind. So on my mind right now is a simplified new user onboarding experience. So if you've got some good suggestions, like this is a good week to tell me. Obviously next week is also okay, but by next week we'll have made some decisions, will be less effective. So we're playing around with like those forms of like, what is the right amount of, like, I think a lot of companies pay lip service to transparency, but I don't actually think transparency is a good thing in and of itself, because, imagine if like you were just transparent, like physically, and people could just see like all of your organs. Like it'd be kind of weird and disgusting unless, you were a doctor and knew what you're looking for. It'd be kind of distracting. So like too much transparency is distracting. What's important is clarity. So how do you optimize for clarity inside the organization? Not transparency, clarity. I want people to know what's in context, what they need to know, what's important for them, what feels right. And it's a different thing. And this asynchronous work style gives us many more opportunities to optimize for clarity. I haven't figured out like the perfect answer for exactly how to do it.
Amazing. I want to be respectful of your time because you've given an incredibly generous amount of it.
Thank you.
So firstly, Phil, let me say thank you so much for the and the game changing bit for me. All the things that you're doing, I think, are really exciting, and interesting. So please keep going down that furrow because I think the way you're thinking about things is really refreshing. and it clearly bleeds through into the product and the quality of the things you do. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all the things you do. I'll put links to all of the things, including the multitude of podcasts and other videos that you do in the show notes. But thank you so much.
Christian, thank you so much. It's been great being here. And I mean, just from this conversation, I'm going to think about this compensation thing a lot. It's like there's a few things that I learned just from the past hour with you. So it was very, very much an hour well spent. So thank you for the opportunity.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Phil for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Phil, All Turtles, and the fabulous mmhmm software, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there, including the demo that I've done using it. There are also links there to various podcasts and videos that All Turtles produce that explore some of the topics we talk about. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To find out more about human risk and the work that I do with my clients in helping them to mitigate theirs and get the best out of their workforce, visit human-risk.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Remember that work can be asynchronous as well as synchronous, and that video really isn't a poor substitute for live meetings face-to-face. It's actually its own separate thing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you very soon for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.